Hi there and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. Now the inspiration for this video I owe to a comment that was left on a recent upload, and I just thought it was rather perceptive because it said the channel of A Disappointed Man is effectively about two things: books and reading. And that really got me pondering this distinction. And I did recognize that the videos I make that are centered more on reading do rather better than the ones I make which focus on books, reviews of course being the best examples of those. So I thought in this video I would delve a little more into this question of reading and specifically how I identify the books I wish to read. Now here I must make a distinction, of course, because many of the books I feature on the channel are classic works, and there what I'm about to delve into doesn't really apply. I go to a used bookstore here, and basically if I see some of these, yes, Oxford World's Classics, there are only two criteria standing in the way of a purchase. First, Jason, do you already own the book in question? And I do carry around with me on my phone a little database of all the books I've got on the shelves behind me, works of fiction, that is. And the second criteria is the price. Is it worth it? So those are the two things. If I can satisfy both of those criteria, on we go to the cash register. However, in the case of the less well-known books that I also present on the channel, and here I've taken as an example the Aerodrome by Rex Warner from 1941, which is going to be the subject of my next review, then the process is really rather different, and we have to touch on such matters as literary history and the critical literature to really gain an understanding of how I ended up purchasing this book and what I did with the knowledge I acquired from it afterwards. And so that is what we'll be talking about. So let's jump into it. But let's not be premature. Before moving on, I should say why I focus on classic works on the channel. Why not just devote it to my own specialized interests and just present kind of cult or obscure works for your perusal? Well, there are basically two reasons. The first is accessibility. I know that all of these classic works are available in any public library and pretty much any bookstore, and that's important. I want my viewers to be able to go out and find these books for themselves easily. Secondly, a knowledge of these classic works is extremely useful because pretty much every work of fiction is relying upon the works that have preceded it. And these classics are the ones that have been the most influential. Paradise Lost has influenced the most subsequent poetry. Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, which we'll mention again in this video, has influenced an awful lot of the English literature that followed it. So to not have an engagement with these would be bad for me, and it would be bad for anyone seeking to develop rich knowledge of English literature. So that is why I have classic works on my channel. Now let's turn to the case of the Aerodrome. The starting point for my engagement with Rex Warner was my long-standing interest in the literature of the interwar years, not just its fiction, but its poetry too, particularly that of Auden and Louis MacNeice. And I think possibly the first mention of Warner's name that I came across was in this book, The Auden Generation by Samuel Hines. And it just noted in passing that Warner was moving in the same literary circles as Spender, Auden and Cecil Day-Lewis during his student days at Oxford. Sometime later, maybe a year or so, I was reading through another book, Walter Allen's Tradition and Dream, and this is the English and American novel from the 20s to our time here being the 1980s. However, Walter Allen also produced this book, the English novel, which leads you all the way from Robinson Crusoe to the 1950s. These two books together, I'll link in the description below, are very good ways to get started on acquainting yourself rapidly with the basic framework of the history of the novel in English. All right, so in Walter Allen's book, it had 2 pages about Rex Warner, and it contained a very brief description of the Aerodrome. So let me just read it to you. Warner's best novel, The Aerodrome, describes the taking over of a village by a mysterious air force, an authoritarian movement dedicated to efficiency and the proposition that the world may be clean. When it was published, no doubt because of the times, it was taken as an allegorical satire on fascism or Nazism, but the Air Force now appears much more like an allegorical representation of communism. In a foreword to the Aerodrome, Warner says, "I do not even aim at realism, yet by disregarding realism, he could do no more than produce a parable that, for all its neatness, partly because of its neatness, has very little relevance to the dilemma and the historical situation it is supposed to represent and illuminate. They are indeed simplified almost out of existence. The village, dominated as it is by squire and parson, cannot stand in any adequate way for the world of traditional democratic values because it bears almost no relation to the actual world," and so on and so on. And it was this description that first piqued my interest and made me place an order for the Aerodrome. It subsequently arrived, and then I read it. And what then? There were 2 things I noticed reading through the Aerodrome. The first of these had been missed by Walter Allen, and I found that hard to believe actually, because I know he's intimately acquainted with this novel, but that was the fact that the Aerodrome takes its form from Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, one of my favourite novels, as regular viewers of this channel will know. So I dashed onto Google Scholar to see if I was the first person to make this stunning link, and no, there was some JSTOR essay from the 1950s pointing this out, so my hopes there were dashed. The second thing I noticed was how the language, the atmosphere of this novel really recalled the later work of J.G. Ballard. So again, I went to see if this similarity had been noticed, and yes, it had. Never mind, my fame will have to wait. Then, while reading through articles on Rex Warner, I stumbled upon a simply excellent critical work. I think this is the first critical work I'm going to mention on the channel, and it is called The 1930s, a Decade of Modern British Fiction. Just trying to get the title right there. And in there was an excellent essay by Eleanor Taylor, one of the editors, and it featured lengthy, close reading of the Aerodrome, but it placed it alongside a number of other works which were speculating in the late 1930s, early 40s on what a fascist regime in Britain might look like. And there I found 3 titles which I am now going to investigate also. So this is the way one book can lead through a process of research to some more interesting books. So let's talk about these 3 other books that I've already decided to purchase. The first of these is the most well known, and it's called Swastika Night by Constantine Murray, the pen name of Catherine Burdekin, and it's still in print. It's in the series of sci-fi masterworks like this one by Alfred Bester. That's easily obtainable, so I'm very excited about that. And it's an alternate history when the Nazis win World War II. What does that remind us of? Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle. So, a new title to me, but one that I'm very much now looking forward to reading. The second book is called In the Second Year, also by a woman, Storm Jameson, and she extrapolated from Hitler's Night of the Long Knives in 1936 and imagined Britain falling into the grip of a fascist movement. That one will be really difficult to get hold of. And the third one, and this really sounds good, it's called The Arrogant History of White Ben, and in this supernatural fantasy, an animate scarecrow becomes the dictator of a near future England. So there you have it. I've sort of shown you the process which I go through when locating these less well-known works of fiction and how I kind of jump from one to the other. There, that's all I really have to say, isn't it? This was my video about reading. I hope it's been somewhat enlightening by taking you behind the scenes of the channel of A Disappointed Man and showing you just how much effort goes into, firstly, identifying and then tracking down interesting titles to read, which I then bring to you, hand to you on a silver platter, as it were, here on my channel. All right, it's time to go. But before I depart, I must, of course, repeat my mantra. Be safe, be strong, and until the next time, which will be the review of the Aerodrome, Nanu Nanu.